there, my name is Kelley Cody Grimm.
And I'm Max Grimm.
And we are Creative Actors Lab. What we want to do is just talk a little bit about how you can bring creativity into your everyday life. Hey everybody, it's
guys,
Kelley.
And Max.
And we are back for another podcast, and today's theme is Show, Don't Tell.
Indeed. That is a direction I have been giving actors since I can remember. Ever since I've been directing all these years ago, I'll have an actor say to me, what I want to do is my character should do this, and then I was thinking about that, and I was like, shush, 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 shush. Show me. Don't tell me, show me. And they do, and that's when the performance starts to click, when you stop talking about it and you take action.
Definitely. I absolutely agree with that. And I think, when I have been teaching improv, and one of the examples I use are when I have my students, will be talking about ways to set up a particular scene. And I'll talk about, there's a big difference between sitting with your partner, you've got that pre-established relationship, and you turn to them and go, honey, do you remember that time your mom came with us on our honeymoon? Okay, well, you're telling me that, you know what? It'd be way more interesting if I actually got to see the scene and not have you regale me about it. Mm-hmm. And, it's whether you're writing, it's whether, again, you're telling a story and it's part of your business presentation. If you have pictures and you have really good stories to tell, those are the things that are really going to enrich what you're doing.
Human beings learn in very different ways. Some people get whatever concept you're trying to get across to them by hearing about it, by hearing a story about it. Mm-hmm. Some people need to get their hands on whatever it is and actually physically do the stuff. And what I find, quite frankly, is that when you're trying to get a concept across, to verbalize it is great, but you have to put it into action also. If you are giving yourself whatever concept you're trying to get across, give yourself as many different ways to get that concept across as possible, be it verbally, be it by telling a story, by demonstrating it, or preferably having somebody come up and say, okay, here's how I'm going to do this now. You put your hands on it and you do it. There was a story about the director Jerzy Grotowski, and he was a very experimental, very avant-garde, groundbreaking director. This was back in the 60s and 70s. And what he would do, apparently, is that he had his company of actors, and he would bring in literally shaman from Africa, from South America. He'd bring in these different yogis, these different people of all these different spiritual disciplines, and particularly when it came to the shaman. They would do these. There's this thing in acting. There's this whole series of exercises called the animal exercises, and what that consists of is basically you are developing your character, or what animal rather would my character be? Would it be a snake, a porcupine, a tiger, a house cat, whatever? And the way that Grotowski would do this is he would bring in these shaman villages across the world, and they would do these sort of ritual dances where they would become an animal, where they would sort of shapeshift into an animal. And they would be able to twist their bodies in very contorted, elaborate positions, and go through these flows of movement that were just very, very complicated and abstract. And once the shaman would finish, Grotowski would turn around to his students and say, you do the same. And they would look at him like he had lost his mind. And it's like, I can't do this. I can't. And it's like, just do it. It's a funny thing that I remember actually a friend of mine would do these monthly art shows. And part of the thing, if you were to be an artist exhibiting in this thing, as I did, you at some point or other, you had to get up in front of everybody and describe the painting that you brought or the photography that you brought or whatever. And then people would ask you questions. I was not uncomfortable with that personally, but so many of the artists, because artists and painters they work in a solitary fashion and they don't interact with people a lot, particularly while they're in the course of creating their art, unlike actors. And these people would just be like, I can't do that. I can't get up and speak in front of people. And then it was well, basically that's kind of the rules of the game. You've got to get up and do this. And these people who were just, so anxious and so nervous and so full of, butterflies in the belly and stage fright and all that sort of a thing, they would get up and they just, without thinking, without planning anything, without having any sort of preconceived notions or rehearsed monologues in their head, they would just get up there, and these people who were just terrified and anxious, and because public speaking can be a very terrifying thing to people who are not used to it, they would just get up there, and once they would start talking, it just flowed. And they would come up with these really eloquent, creative, engaging answers and dialogues, whereas 10 minutes earlier they were just, I can't do this. And so it's like, and kind of once you get over that, once you just sort of put yourself out there and open up your mouth and just trust the universe, as the old saying, be bold and the gods will provide.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And, I think what is very interesting coaching children is children automatically know to show more than tell, because that's where they are right now. Their verbal skills may not be as advanced as an adult. So yeah, you're showing, you're running down a hill and you're the king of the mountain and you're jumping around like a frog. Do you remember when we taught summer camp and you were telling kids to be water?
That was awesome.
That was pretty awesome.
Yeah, actually the thing I would say about that is, okay, so we were teaching, this was a couple of years ago, and we were teaching some kids, and we had a sort of a group of like middle schoolers and high schoolers and so forth, and all of a sudden, guess what, Kelley and Max, you guys get to teach a bunch of 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. And this was not planned, but there's this one movement exercise that it has to do with you become water. And it's like, first you become rain, and then you become a puddle, then you become a lake, then you become an ocean, and then you start to the act of condensation begins to start, and then you turn into water vapor and you go back into the clouds. Now, I had done this thing with like older kids and adults, and they were very reticent to do anything about this. But we got the little kids in there, and it's just like, okay, kids, you are a calm lake of water, and this whole bunch of kids, without even thinking, without having any kind of, am I going to look foolish doing this? They just plain did it. They just all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm a calm body of water. Okay, now you're rain. Now you're a thunderstorm, and they're running and jumping all over the place and making flowy water movements, and they were becoming raindrops, and they were becoming clouds and condensation without any sort of preconceived, how am I going to look doing this? Am I going to appear foolish? And it's like, no, you're just plain doing it. It's coming from this organic, spontaneous part of your being. And, and I heard something recently also in Buddhism. There's a concept about pain and suffering. The purpose of pain, the purpose of suffering in this life is to teach compassion. But another thing that I just heard relating to this is pain and suffering, be it physical, be it emotional, psychological, or whatever. Part of the reason for it is to help you to figure out you're going through this state of discomfort. Are you going to let that stand in the way of what you want to accomplish? Pain will help you to realize when it comes to accomplishing your goals, are you a doer or are you a talker? You do have those, we're all human beings. This is life. Things happen. We're all fragile. we all have our vulnerabilities, whether we want to show them or admit it or not, but we do. And when those times come around, those times of discomfort, of dis-ease, and things like that, it's like, are you going to let this stand in your way? You can't sit there and say, I'm in pain, or I'm uncomfortable, or something is not set right in my life right now, so I have to put my goals on hold. And sometimes realistically you have to do that. But it's a test. It's to help you realize, it's like, are you a talker or are you a doer? There just come times where it's like, if you were waiting for the moon and the stars to align properly before you attempt this goal, if you're waiting for the right time to get married, if you're waiting for the right time to have a baby, you're never going to get married, you're never going to have a baby. There's a thought in shamanism that basically says now is the moment of power. If you're waiting until you have enough money, or if you have enough social standing, or or whatever, it's you. Whatever it is that you want to accomplish, you're never going to get it done by sitting around and waiting for it. For everything to be perfect, it's never going to be perfect. And just as the shamans say, now is the moment of power.
And I think another good example, and I use this when I'm critiquing other people. I'm in like 2 different critique groups. I'm in a novel critique group because I'm writing my second novel. And then I'm also in a screenplay critique group. And it's always great to have a different set of eyes, multiple sets of eyes on your work, because they are so helpful at catching things. I remember one plot device in particular in a novel that I was writing. This young woman at this cotillion was being sexually assaulted by her date. He had locked all the doors, but then I had one piece where this guy opened up the door and saved her, and one of the guys in my group went, all the doors were locked. How did he manage to do that? And I'm like, dope. She probably needs to try to unlatch it with her foot while all this is going on so that can happen. And that's just, another good example of people being able to pick up on maybe what you're not showing or things that you may be overlooking. There's also times in your projects, again, whether you're doing business writing or whether you're doing fiction writing, creative writing, is sometimes you do want to skip over the details. You might want to just have a sentence that says, and the mother-in-law cooked up a big fuss at the ceremony. But then they went on their honeymoon. I want to know what that mother-in-law did at the ceremony. Don't gloss over that. But, again, a lot of times it's like, well, no, I thought the honeymoon part was really way more exciting. And it's like, perhaps, certainly there would be different things that you could add there. They're in a different place. They may feel less inhibited about consummating their marriage. However, I want to know what the mother-in-law did at the wedding. How did she disrupt it? Why did she disrupt it? Was it that she could not accept, that her little boy was getting married? It's interesting. I've mentioned mother-in-laws twice in this. Mm-hmm. But, those are the things that people really want to know. If you're just dropping in a line that looks like it has a ton of action and then you back away from it, they are going to say, well, you're telling me this, I'd like to see, even if it's just as a part of literature. Obviously, when you're writing a script and it is a visual medium, you really do need to show that. Don't back away from that. And there's always different ways to, allow that. I recently did a script where a woman was abducted by aliens, and rather than, and just knowing budget-wise, if I was going to produce this myself, I would not be able to afford being able to transport her up into this big spaceship, have her probed and everything. So what I ended up showing was that her car broke down. She was looking around, trying to figure out what was going on. All of a sudden, she sort of froze, and there was a blue light. And then the next time we see her, she's in her car, sound asleep. Now, there was a part there that was missing, but then those pieces start to drop into place as the rest of the narrative goes on. And again, those are the things that, as you're doing that, so people would say, but we didn't get to see what happened. And it's like, you're going to see the aftermath as the story goes on. Mm-hmm. I am going to show you that. And just, part of good storytelling, sometimes you don't need the big splashy sets. You don't need all that stuff. But again, you can show and just let your listeners, let your viewers, let your readers know what's going on. And maybe just as a writing exercise, hey, when we're talking creative prompts, taking one sentence and then just expounding on that, whether you end up using that in your particular creative project or painting it. Or you want to show maybe what that person would cook for dinner. Show that for yourself. It's a really good way just for your own creativity when you are creating those characters or those situations. It really grounds you into what that's going on. And that's, again, something that we tell actors. Sometimes the script doesn't always give you that, but you can show for yourself. You can do that homework as the character. How would this character cook? If they're coming in right after that scene, and maybe the scene takes place after a really bad fight or something like that, or after a promotion, how would that character do? Well, how would they make dinner if they've just been in a bad fight versus just when they've made a promotion? There's vastly different ways that a character would interpret that and feel that. So if you as an actor are able to show that, even if you've just done that as your homework, that was really cool. I was coaching some monologues last week, and the people that had clicked in, it was so cool because they had all done their homework. They really thought about what their characters were doing, and that they would be able to bring in and show, even though, the monologues are a lot of telling, but you can show, and those silences are so powerful, what's going on with their eyes, what's going on with their face. Those are the things that the audience wants to see. And I always tell people there's a lot of power in silence. People are a lot of times can have the upper hand. I actually remember being on jury duty. The lawyer who was questioning me was asking me questions like, "Oh, I see that you're an acting coach." And I'm like, "Yeah, I coach actors." And he goes, "Are you acting now?" And I just paused and I looked at him without saying anything. It was just probably about 10 or 15 seconds, but he's like, "Did you hear me?" And I went, "Uh-huh." That switched the tables because all of a sudden my status got higher than his because I'm like, I'm just letting you think about what you just said. It was a little disrespectful, frankly, but I think he was just trying to get under my skin. Needless to say, kids, I did not make it on that jury, so there.
I really always appreciate it because we did so much, Kelley and I together did so much coaching of actors during the pandemic on Zoom. We would get these groups of people to where the chemistry was such that somebody would do their monologue, and then over in the little chat section or the comments section, all these people would start putting in all these really positive comments, and even if great job, and that really affected me, and I really felt that. And you had some people coming into the program who were very new, very, very green to acting, and they were nervous because they're human beings and they're doing something new and something uncomfortable, and public speaking can be a very nerve-rattling sort of a thing to get into. But when they just got up there and they just did it, and they would get all this feedback, and it was all just this positive, you go girl, if nothing else. And
or just the little hands with applause. That meant so much.
You just saw these people who were like, I'm not so alone anymore, and I'm not so scared anymore. And that's part of what this is all about. I will say also, for about 10 years, I worked in the printing industry, running big, giant, complicated printing presses. And they can be extremely problematic, and everything has got to be just so, or the product just doesn't look right. And there's always a lot of money involved and a lot of time deadlines, and or if they don't get their printed matter in a timely fashion, they're going to lose their job, and all this stuff. Basically, I will say, in that environment, the best working relationship I ever had was with this other guy, and I was put into the job. This is a whole other story in and of itself, but I came to become this printing press operator. I had no training. I had nothing when I came into this, and I mean, I knew nothing from nothing, and I was so green at it, and I realized that these people really depend on the person doing this job really quite deeply. But there was another guy that I was working with, and I am me, born in southeastern United States my whole life. I have a particular history. I have certain education. I have certain experiences and things like that. And I was put in with another gentleman. He was about 15 years, maybe younger than me, maybe more, from Romania. He had a degree from the University of Romania in computer programming. We were so extremely different as people, but it was the best working relationship I ever had because really neither one of us knew really much of anything about what we were doing. And so we got put in the position of like, okay, we've got to get stuff done and we've just got to try problem solving and figuring out workarounds and things like that. And, I come from a particular place and time and history, and as did he. And what would happen is that we would just, we've just got to try stuff. And he'd come up with something and that I would never think to do. I would come up with things that he would never think to do. And then we had the mutual respect to just listen to each other and to be honest, saying, I think that's a great idea, or that's not going to work, let's try this, or here's, I'll get half an idea and then he'll come up with the other half. And it was just a matter of respect and just getting focused on something outside of, am I right, am I wrong, am I going to look like an idiot if I say this? There was none of that. There was none of that consciousness that went on. We just respected and we just listened and we did whatever we needed to do, and maybe it worked, maybe it didn't, but we always had each other's back, and somehow or another we got it done. We got the job done. Everybody and people were just very happy with us. We made a lot of money for the company, and for basically a couple of schnooks who really didn't know what we were doing. We got it done. And schnooks, who we didn't.
Your Miami Yiddish is coming out.
Yes, it is. But we just didn't know what we were doing, and it came down just get over yourself, try it. Maybe you're going to be right, maybe you're going to be wrong, maybe you're going to be somewhere in between. Most likely is what's going to happen. You're going to be somewhere in between right and wrong, and we're just going to listen to each other and give honest feedback. And if we sat there and said that's not going to work, we weren't going to hurt each other's feelings with that stuff, because it was always with respect, and it was always with, you're a smart guy, I'm a smart guy, but we come from two totally different places, and you're going to come up with stuff that I would never think to do, and I'm going to come up with stuff you're never going to think to do. And it's like, we don't have time to sit around and discuss it. We're on timelines. These people are spending a lot of money on this. We've just got to plain buckle down and get it done, and we always did, and it was by just do it.
Another thing I wanted to point out, and this is for me sometimes how I know if somebody is actually being truthful in what they're saying or what their experience is. I was sitting the other day and I was watching a panel, and these were people, within the show business industry, agents, casting directors, and things like that. So there was probably about 10 or 12 people there, and some of them from some pretty big agencies here in the Atlanta area, and some not as much. What really struck me was the fact that the people from the smallest agencies with the least amount of overall experience, or from what I could see later when I looked up their websites and things like that, was that the most vocal people didn't generally have the most clients. They didn't necessarily have an actual honest-to-God website. They might have had a very minimal social media, but man, they had so many opinions. And I found that, again, whether it's just a panel of business people, panel of entertainment people, or whatever, that's something I've really majorly picked up on, is that oftentimes the people who have the least amount of experience, they want to overcompensate and just feel the need to try to be an expert or try to make sure that their opinions are coming across. So there was a lot of telling and not a lot of showing. And I found that the two agents that were from the bigger agencies, really just were sitting back and listening if anybody asked them directly. There was this one person in particular that or actually there were a few, oh yeah, well we do this and we do that. And then people, kept on asking them questions and things like that, which, I thought was interesting because they're the most vocal. So in these people's minds, they must have the most experience. And sometimes that's not always the case. And I think, we see that in any number of forums. Again, where you're at a business forum, political forums, I'm not going to get too much into that. But I think you always have to, if you're hearing something that you're being told but not shown, it's really incumbent on you to go ahead and do some research. In the podcast Be Aware, we covered how easily it is for people, particularly when they're new in the business, to be taken in, and people want to flatter you. And they want to tell you things, but they may not be able to show you a body of work, So if they're saying, hey, I'd love to cast you in this, and I'm, this award-winning this and that, and they don't really have any body of work to really show you, that does, in my opinion, speak volumes to what they can or cannot do. So if you're being told a bunch of things, you can sit, you can listen, but please do your research, because if they can't actually show you something, if they can't actually show you a film clip from that award-winning movie that they're talking about, but they're just talking it up and hyping it up, there's usually, as my daughter likes to say, it's sus or sketch. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you're sitting there and you just have people that you're sitting there going, I don't think they have that much experience, but man, they've got a lot of opinions, and you will actually find that what a lot of studies, and I listened to another podcast that talks about brain, the inner cosmos, and the host of that was talking about how we tend to try to overcompensate for our inexperience by learning a little bit and thinking that we're an expert in that little bit. Then you start getting into that field and you realize you don't really know as much, and you quiet down. And then at the point that you are becoming a little bit more expert, you might be more likely to say something, but there's always that phase between the new, well, I've taken 3 acting classes and I read the first chapter of An Actor Prepares, therefore I can evaluate everybody's performance, versus somebody who, like Max and I, who've been in it for decades and are going, honestly, we just don't know everything. We don't know. That's a really good question. Let me think about that. I'm not going to jump right on the answer train because you've given me something to think about. And we always say to each other, we're always learning new things every day, and we're always learning from our students. But if you are in a room with somebody who's just a bit of a braggart and they're blowing a lot of hot air, be aware and, take down whatever information you can, and then, see if they're actually telling you but not really showing you.
I have a general approach to life, especially if it's a situation that I'm just not familiar with. But I pretty much do this all the time anyway. But it basically comes down to, Max, keep your eyes and ears open and your big mouth shut. Mm-hmm. Okay? And seek first to understand, then to be understood, and stay in your lane. Because the thing I guess about growing older that I'm very much appreciating is you come to realize it's okay to not know everything, to not be an automatic expert with whatever the given situation is, being it an acting job or anything really. And the thing about that sort of approach is that it gives you time, it gives you the space to listen. If you were talking all the time, you're not listening. There's this old Buddhist story about a student who came to a master and sat down and just started talking the master's ear off of, I know this about the scriptures and this about meditation and this about philosophy. I'm here to learn from you, and then just blah, 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 and on this verbal rant of just verbal diarrhea going on. And the master said once the kid kind of like ran out of steam and air and breath, said to his servant, would you bring us some tea, please? And so the servant brings in tea. And the master says to the student, let me pour you a cup of tea. And so the master starts to pour the cup of tea, and it goes, and it just keeps pouring, and it's overflowing. It's going all over the table. It's all over the tray. It's falling on the floor, and the student's like, "What are you doing? The cup is full." And he's like, "That cup of tea is you. You have no room to you have no room to learn anything else because you're so full of you putting your own opinions out into the world, which you're gonna do, but." Me pouring this tea all over the cup and the floor and the table and everything, you're not leaving any space to learn anything new. And when you get in these situations and you just, especially when you're not familiar, and you just keep your mouth shut, you observe, you do the best you can, and learn from your mistakes. I say this also because, again, for actors, and especially if you're new to this, and even if you're not, public speaking is, as I have just said, it can be a very nerve-rattling sort of experience. And it's one of the biggest phobias that I think people have, if not the biggest phobia. But also, what's an even bigger phobia is the fear of public humiliation, of looking like a jackass in front of a crowd of people. And particularly for actors, if you're going to make a mistake, chances are you're going to do it in front of a whole bunch of people. If you're going to blow a line, or if you're going to have an inappropriate concept about the character that you're portraying or something like that, and looking at you going, that sucks. That is a huge psychological fear. I don't care if you're an actor or whatever you are. But there just does come a point, again, about growing older that I am very much appreciative of, is that, when you do have those moments of you all of a sudden look like a nincompoop in front of a group of people, guess what? You live through it. You go on. You learn to get a sense of humor about yourself, and you learn from your own mistakes. The older you get, that's what you can acquire. That's a quality that you can acquire and beget as you are growing older. Unless, of course, you just are of the mindset of I have to be right about everything, in which case you're just going to get harder headed, and you're going to keep making mistakes, and you're going to not learn the lessons that you need to be learning, because most of the lessons we need to learn in life, we don't learn in school. We learn from going out in the world, and you ultimately, all of us, learn more from our failures than our mistakes. And the only way that you do that is you just plain got to get up there, bite the bullet, and do it. And if you make a mistake, you make a mistake. All that means is you are a human being, and whatever you make of it, whatever you choose to make of whatever just happened, whatever embarrassing situation just happened, it's whatever amount of grace you can muster, and whatever amount of humor about oneself that you can possibly muster. And I realize, as I'm saying this is certainly easier said than done, but as you do get older, and you do have those moments in front of other people where you're making the mistakes, you just pick up and you just learn from it, and you go with it. And this is how you get wiser and older and stronger and more graceful.
And I think so often what does hold us back is, not so much FOMO, fear of missing out. I think it's FOMU, which is fear of messing up. Mm-hmm. And so people are going to mess up. But however, we are in a world when you and I were growing up, I don't think there were even VCRs, or there might have been. There were home movie cameras, but people just were not videotaping their life and then putting it up online and trying to show a very different way of looking at things than maybe what is factual. We are seeing people show, and then what they show on social media are filtered, and it's only the best parts of their life, because they're not going to show their failures most of the time. They're not going to say, oh, other people may take that video and other people may post that. But, to be honest with you, 99% of the time, and I actually, oddly enough, heard this from Dr. Phil, and I don't know if he meant it the way he did, but people think less of you than you think they do. And it's not so much that they think less of your character. It's after you screw up or something like that, they're not thinking about you. They've already moved on to something that's more person-centric as far as they go.
Yeah.
So for you to sit there and ruminate and go, oh my gosh, I mispronounced this person's name, or I said the wrong thing, or whatever, they've moved on. I mean, there's, hundreds of things happen to us in the course of a day at the very least. That one little incident, that's in the background now. That's not where it is. So again, if you feel like, I'm just going to tell myself over and over and over again, oh, I messed up, and you really fixate. And that's, we do fixate on the negative things. You can sit there and have an evaluation from a course, and 97% of those evaluations, or 98, are just incredible. You're going to focus on the 2 that are not, because for whatever reason, that affirms the doubts that you have about yourself. So, what I would tell you is show yourself some compassion. Yeah. Tell yourself that, things are going well. You got this. And I think the more that we just kind of show and tell ourselves that, and give ourselves a little pat on the back if no one else is, catch your breath, and, at the end of the day, you're going to be okay. But if the stakes are just super, super high and you feel like you've made that little bit of a mistake, I've screwed up doing public speaking. I've started to have a panic attack in the middle of a performance where I knew my voice was quaking. I sat down. Luckily, someone else was doing a sketch, and by the time I had done my breathing and it was time for me to introduce the next sketch, I had talked myself out of it. But that's because I could tell myself those things, and I really tried not to let show what I was feeling at the time. So I guess, if we're going to round this out, just be compassionate, show yourself some love. And as far as like narrative and acting, definitely show us, don't tell us. If you're doing improv, jump into that scene, be in the moment, show yourself that you were able to do that. And, I really think from a performance, and this is whether, again, you're doing a presentation for business, you're creating a startup, things like that, if you just show yourself that, you're just going to feel better.
Compassionate self-discipline. That's one thing I say to people. I think I've said it to probably every single student I've ever had at some point or other. And again, if you're waiting for the right moment, if you're waiting for the moon and the stars to align in some perfect position in the sky for you to do something, you're not ever going to do it. Just do it. Be brave. The gods will provide.
We appreciate you guys tuning in, and keep in mind that you can catch us on our social media, Creative Actors Lab on Instagram and Facebook, and by the same name on YouTube. And for more on what we do, you can go to our website,
creativeactorslab.com, all one word. Thank you for listening. Stay curious, make art, not war. Much love until next time.